I think if I was able to let go of the hard drugs and keep drinking, I may have had another 5 or 10 years of hell to go through. Because that was what sped up the process to the point that my life was, bad enough that I was willing to try something. But because alcohol is a more socially acceptable vice, like people get forgiven for stupid things they do in a blackout. But you don't get forgiven if you steal a bunch of things for people because you're high on stimulants. I got clean and sober because I ran out of options. It was December. I had nowhere to live. And my options were stay on the streets or go to a treatment center.
Super stoked to have Ben on the show. Ben and I go way back, like 10 years, 15 years?
Not that long, but
10 years.
About 7 years.
7 years. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure it's more like 10 years.
Where? How did you meet him?
It's old skate pals. Not old skate pals, but old skate pals.
I taught him everything he knows.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So. Yeah. No, but we're super close, and like our families are close, and our kids are close, and his son used to sleep over at my house all the time. So he built my ramp. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, in my videos, yeah, it's your house where I built the ramp. Yeah,
that's right. So, and like super inspiring person. I think a really inspiring story. So, somebody that I actually I look up to, and I appreciate advice from. So I've reached out to him. I think things have been hard to get advice and stuff. So important person in my life. So we can. You want to give a couple sentences about who you are and you can intro about yourself?
I mean, who am I? I don't know. I'm father of 4, 42 years old. I have lived in Vancouver, my Vancouver area or Vancouver Island my entire life. And what people know me for is I have a skateboard channel where I've primarily talked about gear. So the different, the way changing little bits of your skateboard can make it feel different. That's sort of like on the surface. And then a little below the surface, it's actually more about helping people refine their connection to skateboarding or keep it fueled. That has a lot more to do with, that's when I look at its primary purpose, I think that's what it is more keeping people excited about something they either currently love or used to love. And the other, I have a second channel that I started a little bit after. So the skateboard one is 7 years old and the construction channel is 6 years old. And that one is, has become primarily like a drywall tutorial channel. And because of it, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of square feet of drywall that probably look better than it was going to had they not found useful videos to do a better job. So that's what the primary focus is on that one. I get really bored of it sometimes because you can only teach the same thing so many times. You can only repackage it so many times, and it's been 6 years. So
6 years, crazy. Yeah.
And I get the comments all the time, like, never stop making videos and blah, blah. And I'm like, I mean, there's already hundreds of videos. Like, how many times can I talk about the same thing?
Enter the drywall.
Yeah. Like how there's only so many, there's a lot of ways that you can repair drywall and tape drywall, but there's also only so many. Mm-hmm. And once you've made well over 300 videos, it gets a little dry.
Well,
pun intended.
It was actually as I was saying it. Mm-hmm.
Well, we have a specific purpose for having you on the show, and I'll get into that. But I want to introduce Jessica because I don't think you guys briefly met.
No, we haven't.
You don't know her background.
So I work for Complex Pain and Addictions at VGH. I'm a consult nurse on the team, but I've been a nurse for almost 10 years, predominantly working in acute medicine inpatient facility, but I also work in the downtown east side as a correction nurse, and have lots of exposure with mental health, substance use, and addiction care. So that's where like my passion lies, is kind of dealing with that kind of thing.
Yeah. And there are nurses and then there are nurses. So Jess's capacity is like beyond any nurse I've worked with. So we were recently at a conference in Texas. It was an academic conference for addiction medicine. She was presenting some research, and these are academic addiction docs. So not the average addiction doc who goes to these big conferences. And she was schooling these addiction docs about protocols and how to start people on particular medications. It was super cool to see because, you know, these are like supposed experts in the field, and here's Jess as a nurse schooling them. So
Just a nurse, might I add? Just a
Did I
nurse.
say just?
No, that's what they said.
They said
I hope
just a-
they're not listening to this podcast. So
you're just a nurse.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the background.
This is Jess.
Yeah.
She's just a nurse.
Yeah. That's my tagline. Thank you.
Well, as you know, I'm an addiction medicine doctor, and I do a lot of research. So about maybe a third of my time now is spent doing research. But, you know, at a certain point, it struck me that much of the research that we do is focused on treating addiction once it has occurred. And so the thought was, what about preventing addiction from happening in the first place? And that's called primary prevention. And it's been done quite poorly in the past, I feel. You know, we're talking about campaigns like "This is your brain on drugs" or "Just say no," or like it's like really cheesy like graphics. This is what happens to your lungs when you smoke cigarettes.
I mean, I was pretty scared to try everything
And we'll get into that because I think that's super important.
because of those ads.
Were you? Okay.
Didn't
okay.
stop me.
Well, there you go. So we'll talk about that. Like that's like super key to what we're trying to get into. So anyways, in thinking about like what does in fact impact young people's behavior and decision making, etc. You know, it struck me that like, okay, like social media is a big factor, and like the power of influencers and the power of people that young people may admire in terms of modeling behavior.
There's not a lot of good models in skateboarding,
Yeah, well,
at least not that
yeah.
get widespread recognition and exposure.
Yeah, and not only skateboarding, but I think social culture in general.
Well, how far do you have to get into any hot new skateboard video before they start showing the smoking weed clips?
Yeah.
Like it's not very far.
So anyways, so that's the whole purpose. And for you, it's really interesting for me to understand about, you know, and we didn't talk about this beforehand, so I hope you're cool. If you're not, well, you're kind of trapped. But you know, your history with addiction, and how that may have evolved for you. I know it's a personal and like vulnerable place.
So I've talked about it on my skateboard channel.
Yeah.
So it's not news to anybody.
No, it's not.
And I just filmed one on the construction channel where I did get into it in a very surface way. So I'm not against putting it out there.
Well, I think we'll try to get deep if we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I'll put,
I mean, if he's comfortable.
well, he's got no choice.
We'll
At this
get-
point, he's trapped.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Chris, did I leave anything out?
No, I mean, that's pretty much what happened. I mean, I started channeling my stuff towards more of the mental health stuff when Ben passed away, you know, like 2019 stuff. And then, yeah, people started like messaging me. They sometimes still, I actually got one the other day, just people reaching out being like, dude, this is what's going on with me. How do I? And then I was like, oh my God, I don't have
Like in too deep.
I don't have the reason. Yeah, like I don't know what the hell to do. So I kind of toned that side of it down, and then and then I met Puya, and we kind of started doing this. And we're kind of, I mean, everything's kind of in one thing: mental health and addiction and everything. We're just
They are intertwined.
yeah. So we're trying to do it, and we did a couple little, I mean, presentations at some of the Ivy League schools in Stanford and stuff like the past couple months, just about showing them, like, I was basically talking about what skating is to them because they have no idea. And I mean, just from that side of it, they seemed pretty responsive to what we were talking about. I mean, they had no idea about skating, so it was just me talking about what it is and how skating affects me and the community we have and stuff. So that kind of made me feel like there was actually the subculture, instead of like going and trying to just put it on the news and being like, yo, don't do drugs or whatever. We can channel it to these specific subcultures first organically, and then maybe we can leak into other things in society, and then we do that sort of pass with it, you know what I mean? So, and again, it's not about, I mean, we know skating, right? You can't push anything on anybody, otherwise they're gonna, so it's a very delicate thing that we have to do, and it's about making the content, so if somebody wanted to go and find it, it's there. It's just a matter of how do we cannot be too
Yeah, we're
forceful.
talking about people's choices.
Yeah.
And we have to respect and honor their right to make them, and not judge the choices that they choose to make. Which is challenging.
Well, yeah, it is, but there's no judgment. You know, I don't think and like telling
But
people.
when you put out something like, this is your brain on drugs, and you put out such strong messaging, it's contrary to the decisions that a lot of people have made, and they're immediately going to reject it because it's an affront to their personal integrity.
And not only that, I agree, but also you lose credibility pretty quickly, right? Like, just like, do most people that use cannabis, are they addicted to cannabis? Most people use.
I'd say no, but I mean, I don't want to be. I don't want to get into that, to be honest.
But also, like, what about cocaine? Do most people that use cocaine?
No, it's like a party drug.
Right?
So
I feel like these broad stroke messages of like, do drugs, this is what's going to happen to your brain, and then you have a kid who's smoking pot and they feel like, hey, it's not affecting me. You very quickly lose credibility. So I think there is a sense of like, you have to be honest as well. Like, what is the true risk? Because, you know, parents can try to like use scare tactics, or these campaigns can use scare tactics, but very quickly people are like, okay, well, they're just trying to scare me.
Well, I could give you a perfect example of that. So I was absolutely terrified. I remember being 10 years old and being, you know, starting to see all those ads. And you also start hearing the stories about people's older siblings who are getting into drugs. And you're like, how could anybody make such a stupid decision when we all know it's so bad for you? Right? Those commercials have a really good effect on a impressionable mind.
That's right.
But as I got a little older, and we're talking 1 year, I'm 11 at this point, and now I'm a skateboarder, and I want to be, you know, like a badass. I want to be cool. I want, and like taking risks really kind of becomes, I mean, for me, I'll speak for myself, it definitely became my image, you know,
That's
like
right.
being tough, taking risks, not being afraid of things. And I became willing to try that stuff. Drugs in general. It didn't really catch for me until about 14, though. Like, it was more a very occasional and intermittent thing. And I remember it being also a very overwhelming experience, like just getting really baked and being paranoid and not knowing how to like interpret it. So it was kind of, it wasn't regular until about 14.
Here's a question.
Well, I wanted to let me finish the part that I was going to talk about really quick.
Please do.
Okay, so we were talking about how we think it's the, you know, most frightening thing in the world to do until you try it a few times, and then after you're like, I'm okay. Like, I'm okay, right? My brain didn't like dissolve and fall out of my nose. You know, I'm not a walking zombie. And so you think, okay, and in my case, I actually started to like it quite a bit too. After the first few times of being really paranoid and having it just like mess my head up in a weird psychedelic way, once I got past that, I started to enjoy it because it gave me a relief from the problems I was experiencing, which was I was always at odds against my teachers, school, parents, authority figures in general. And so I had this tremendous level of stress that I was constantly dealing with, this sense of shame and anger that I carried with me everywhere and of not feeling a part of. And I noticed on a subconscious level, I remember a little bit thinking like, this is nice. Like, I don't feel this weight anymore when I would smoke weed. And so very quickly that became something that was now providing me with escape and often pleasure as well. So I thought, well, this is just the lightest of the bunch. And if I like this much, maybe the other things aren't that bad, because like they must have been lying to me. If this is this good, the rest must be better.
Right.
And that was what kind of opened the door to me even being willing to try things more than just cannabis and alcohol. You know, then the hallucinogens come in and you're like, that was wild, but I'm okay. And if that was like that, then what's the next one like? And there's just this, like, in my case, I figured I'm never going to get addicted. I'm too smart to get addicted, right? You try it and you don't do it again. Like, that's easy. For the record, my first time trying, I'll just be blunt. My first time trying crystal meth lasted like 3 days. Like, it wasn't like, oh, we'll just try. It was like, okay, we tried that. Whoa, that was, interesting. We stayed up all night. Let's do that again. And 3 days. Like, that wasn't supposed to be like that. That was, I can try this once and it's not going to be a problem, right?
Can we go back a couple steps? Because you talked about this 10-year-old kid who was like terrified of drugs, right?
I even remember having like crazy dreams where like I had like older brothers of friends that were like zombies and were like telling me I should do something, and I'm like, no. Right.
So you were scared.
Yeah.
But you're also having a particular experience in school that's like very distressing, right? And it seems like there was this interplay between that distressing experience and the relief you got from that experience. But can you describe that experience? Because I think it's probably something that a lot of youth or young people can relate to. Certainly I can.
Well, the experience was, putting it lightly, would be feeling out of place, ashamed because I didn't fit in, and just happy when I wasn't there.
And let's go with that. Like, what do you think made you feel as though you did not fit in? Because there's a bunch of kids there. A lot of the kids feel as though they fit in, but there are some who are like totally like.
Where was skating?
That's a good question. So I started skating when I was 11 years old.
So skating was already like.
I started skating. So you got the scared 10-year-old kid, and then you've got. My skating story is really dumb why I started. It's kind of funny that it became like my lifelong passion. So I had this friend. I was like so into being a ninja. I was like so into being a ninja. Yeah, I was like a martial arts kid.
Yeah.
And then one of the my friend that I did karate lessons with was like, who's really cool? Skateboarders. And this was 92, 93 when like they were wearing the ridiculously big pants and the skateboards changed shape. They went from what you would have seen in the 80s, so a big board with big fat wheels and only one kick on one side, and all of a sudden they had two kicks and these tiny wheels, and skaters were wearing these like insanely big pants and just crazy outfits. And he was like, yeah, skaters are super cool. And he was always talking about what his sister was saying about skating. And so I was like, yeah, okay, let's try skateboarding. I was drawn to it because it was this like subculture of rebellion that I was so interested in, that I rapidly became so interested in, and it fit like a glove too, right? Because all of a sudden I had this freedom, right? This board under me, this freedom. It was something that I could do. So and I enjoyed it. I didn't mind falling. So that whole like. I would say throughout my life, one of the dominant themes is like I'm a risk taker and a pleasure seeker. Like I like things that give me a thrill and then that have a reward after. So even something as simple like in construction, I've often liked the jobs where there is heights involved or some sort of danger. And then to pull that off and come home safe at the end of the day is enjoyable. So, yeah. I do the safety squint a lot.
Does that run in your family, though? I know. Isn't Ted doing some...
Ted's an arborist, so maybe a little bit, yeah. Yeah, maybe a little bit.
That's his brother, older brother. Yeah.
Got you.
I don't think Ted's story is definitely different because he didn't struggle with addiction in the same way that I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely tried some things, but it didn't take, right?
Yeah.
Whereas it took for me, and rapidly.
So when you're feeling like there's no, like you didn't belong anywhere in school and stuff, how was your skating community like? Was there any...
The skating community was just me and a few friends, and then all these older kids in the high school that I wanted to, like they're better. They'd been doing it for longer, and so we just looked up to them. And I also don't think that I could have articulated or known that I had a feeling that I didn't belong. I don't think I had that formed in my head. I think I was just, angry and seeking. I was just searching for something.
Can I ask? I'm going to harp on this so I understand it. And I think I may know about your experience as a 10-year-old kid, because I may relate to it as well. But you didn't fit in. Was it the way you were treated by your teachers, the way you performed in school? Like, how were you different that set you apart from other kids?
Teachers more than peers.
Yeah, in what way?
More than peers by a lot, I would say, because I don't have very many memories of, like, I got, I wouldn't even say I got bullied. Like, I would say there was instances of bullying, but I would say I also participated in instances of bullying. Like, it's not... I don't feel like there was any one person that ever singled me out over a prolonged period of time. So it wasn't my classmates. I mean, I definitely was never one of the cool kids. Even when everyone else started skateboarding, like there was this whole summer of 94 where everyone in grade 7 started skateboarding for just the whole summer. And then most of them all quit as soon as the summer when they went into grade 8 started. But it was like the coolest thing for one summer, and I had already been doing it for a year. But even then, I never felt like I fit in with all those. That was just all my classmates that I already was not connected with. I would say I really felt at odds with school, and I had for a long time. I would say it started in grade 4. This is when it really ramped up. And then by grade 7... I'd say I was lost by grade 7. I never did my homework, so that didn't help. But yeah, I never did my homework. I didn't pay attention in class. I didn't care. So, and then of course my teachers are always angry at me for that, right? And some worse than others. Like some were just concerned and annoying, and some were actually pretty hurtful. And so I would just say my relationship with authority was strained at best. Yeah. Right? Like I was not going to do what they asked of me because I didn't respect them.
Right. And it's interesting because you're like a crazy smart dude, right? And you've done a lot of interesting things in your life. But you've sort of carved your own path through life as well. Not many people make a living as a YouTuber. But at the same time, you struggled academically, and in some ways, well, I relate to your experience because as a kid in school, I also couldn't finish my work, couldn't pay attention. I was running around the class all the time, getting into trouble, being sent to the principal's office, and teachers hated me, except for a couple.
I didn't get into trouble very often. I was the kid who was asleep on his desk.
Just couldn't focus. Yeah. So it was like a learning issue.
Yeah, my grade 6 teacher used to ask my parents if I was eating and was malnourished. The reality was her class was boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I just hear you saying like I didn't care, I didn't do my homework. Why? Like what was happening for you? Because then I'm hearing this whole story about how you're creating all these videos and like teaching people. So you obviously have that within.
I think some of it is how a person learns. Like I remember a long time ago, somebody like going and doing aptitude testing for things. There was a few things that I can remember. So one, my spelling was actually really good. My reading comprehension was very high for my age. I actually read a lot, especially from about maybe 9 to 11. After that, once I started skating, I kind of didn't do anything else after that. But the other thing that stood out was they said I was a kinetic learner, that I learned from doing things. I don't learn from sitting there. And even at BCIT, when I did my carpentry apprenticeship, I had to, when they were doing the lessons on the board, sometimes I could follow, but most of the time I would actually have to tune it out and ignore the lesson and actually just study from the book. Because I couldn't, in that environment, there's too much going on and I was not able to focus. Like, you know, and everybody's all trying to blurt out the answer all the time. Like, so does anyone, right? It's just this like struggle for everybody to try and be like, say the right thing and be the good student. And I'm just sitting there like, I don't even know what they're talking about anymore.
Chris, do you relate to this? I completely relate to this. I mean, this was me at school, and this was me through college as well. And I had to do it, and I feel like that's why I gravitated towards skateboarding, because like there was no coaches, nobody was telling me what to do. I had to learn it on my own. And that med school, I stopped going to lectures. Right, I was just like, get the books, learn it on my own because I couldn't be taught. I mean, you're
unteachable.
But well, that's what I was called. But like, I'm wondering, like, what about you, Chris? Because like you're obviously like very accomplished in skateboarding. But what was your experience like?
Well, I was in Singapore when I was in grade 7 and 8, and I was doing like team skating. Was like not even. It was just so small. There's like 2 stores, and it was, you know, whatever. But I think my learning, I mean, I didn't really get straight A's or anything. I didn't care. I was doing it just because that's what you're supposed to do. Nothing really like, was like, well, this is awesome. I can just straight A this, you know. I was nothing like that. I mean, if I know now, if they would have related to some of those courses into something that was in like skating, if they used like, you know, physics or mathematics, but related it into skating, I probably would have aced the damn school.
Right.
I actually find it all so much more interesting now than I ever did as a kid. I think it's, in a way, it's unfortunate that we are trying to ram so much into the brains of just kids, like people in general, when they're least receptive to it.
Yeah.
Like I was not interested.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know exactly what I was. I don't know what else I would have been interested in. So I can critique it, but I don't have an answer as to how to do it better.
Well,
yeah, I mean, again, I didn't start skating. I was like just started the same time as you did, like 94, just all of 94. So I was like still, I wouldn't have known like how to do that either. And only now I would have known if they would have told me that about skating. Or I guess the sports in general at that time, I probably would have been okay with it, but I just didn't care. But I did it because my parents are both like educators as well.
10-year-old kid, kind of struggling to fit in, sort of that doesn't feel comfortable in school. It's going because they're forced to, essentially. Feels like an outsider, maybe. But finds skateboarding, and skateboarding very quickly coincided with experimenting with drugs. So what was that process like? You find skateboarding, and how did that form your identity?
Well, I just looked at everybody around me that was doing it, and that was primarily, you know, like for me, the big kids were sort of grade 8, 9, and 10, because I was in grade 6 when I started skating. And so I'd be looking at what, the older kids were doing. And was just willing to try.
Okay. But still at this point,
I think I identified so much with the image, like to be cliche, the bad boy image, right? I identified with it so strongly that I was willing to try things that I wasn't prior.
Yeah.
Like, you don't see a lot of that in the martial arts world, you know?
No, you don't.
I don't know what it's like now, but like, you know, we're just talking about like all the old videos from the 80s and stuff, right? It wasn't drug heavy.
No, it wasn't.
But I also realized I was probably not going to get chicks doing my karate moves. Like, seriously.
So that had a piece in it. I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. Let's open that up.
Oh, well, of course, right? Like at that age, you know, you want to be, you want to develop your appealingness to whoever you're trying to appeal to. So that is, right? That's part of it too.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's an honest answer. So this is like your community at this point. This is where you're most comfortable. They're older kids at this point, and this is the segue?
I feel like I had a few friends that were my age, and I'd say most of, like, I definitely didn't hang out with kids that we would have called goodies. You know, like that was, I hung out with, basically I would say I hung out with people that were experiencing the same level of negativity somewhere in their life. And that you can just feel it, right? You know that you're like on the same wavelength, and you don't see it from that lens when you're that age. You just know, like, oh, I get along with this person. I identify with them.
Right.
You don't even know that much. You just know that, like, I like hanging out with that person.
Right. But still, you have a perception of drugs as being dangerous and bad for you. So then how did that process evolve to the point, like, do you recall the first time where that joint was being passed around? And on one hand, you have this perception of drugs being bad for you and dangerous. On the other hand, there's this social pressure maybe of people around you using.
So I don't remember. Here's the thing is, I don't remember it being like a pivotal, like, fork in the road moment. Like I can remember the first time there was a whole bunch of kids. They went into the woods in this, there was like this little shack, and they all, I guess, got stoned in there. And I remember just going with them and being willing to try. I don't remember anything even happening. I don't remember any effect from it. I maybe had like one toke of something, and I didn't feel anything.
But how did you go from this kid who's like deathly afraid of drugs to this kid who's following the other kids into the shed to try drugs?
Well, I mean, probably listening to Dr. Dre The Chronic didn't help.
Yeah.
Honest answer.
No, that's fair though, because that speaks to...
I didn't think about that but that would be one of the many things that, you know, like somebody gave me that tape, and then Nirvana was huge at the time, and it was well known that he was into drugs. So there's all these really, you know, iconic figures at the time, and you know they're all into drugs.
Which is...
Like, we're celebrating, we're putting people that have that lifestyle on a pedestal. So how am I not going to want to emulate and achieve what they've achieved?
Well, sorry.
Yeah, and you were talking about how, like, you want to be included, and you're talking about getting girls, and it's like, well, this is the way to do it.
It's
right?
it's all the same package, right?
I feel like we all have a going to the woods story too, where it's like, I don't remember why I did this, and I don't really remember much, but I remember being like similarly, like, I didn't go with the intention of doing anything, but then it happened, and I was like, well, that was cool.
Yeah, almost more innocuous. Not, like I said, not a big fork in the road moment. It was more like, I would say, if anything, it was more like, oh, finally. You know, it wasn't, so I don't even remember I don't remember that shift occurring, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm so scared, I probably shouldn't be doing, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that voice was in there a little bit, right? That conscience is there. It's often buried. But it was probably there, but it was so small compared to the, like I remember one of the times was, yeah, you know, I'm hanging out with some of the popular girls, and we go to the bog down in Vancouver, like west side of Vancouver. It was definitely one of the spots where that happened. And we go and we, you know, get high, right? And I'm like, great. Why wouldn't I want to be there doing that?
Right. I think the progression is interesting because it's like a balance. On one hand, you start off with, like, the messaging that is bad for you. And that messaging is primarily delivered by people in authority, right? Like parental figures, teacher figures, etc. So you're believing this, and then slowly you have this other message by people that are like super cool and appealing to you, like hip hop stars and skateboarders and actors, musicians, etc.
And the peers that are 1 or 2 years older.
That's right. That it's cool that other people are doing it. So then, like, this voice starts to lose credibility. This other voice, it becomes more and more appealing,
Right.
to the point where that balance is like completely shifted.
And
Is that
Yeah, and I gained acceptance because of my willingness to do all that kind of stuff. You know, like I hung out with the older kids when, like, I was accepted by the grade 8s who were going into grade 9 more than I was accepted by my own peers who were, you know, grade 7, right? Like I hung out with them, but I did, and I'd say it was because I was behaving more like them,
right?
you know?
And like you have this deep desire to fit in, and this is one path of fitting in.
Wouldn't have admitted it. I never felt that desire at an intellectual level.
Right, but looking back,
Yeah, of course. No, I can see it now.
I think it's an experience for most kids, though. It's like they talk about peer pressure, and I remember that, like, growing up, peer pressure, my parents were like, don't let peer pressure get to you. I'm like, I've never felt that. And now I look back and I'm like, maybe that's what was happening in some of those groups of, like, older people, more mature people, guys, whatever. But in that moment, that's not what happened for me.
It doesn't, the experience doesn't line up with how it is portrayed. I never felt peer pressured. I always felt like I walked into the situation willing to do what was being offered, because it's almost like just everything that I had been consuming prepared me for that. Right? It was like made you willing and wanting to go into
peer
drugs.
pressure doesn't necessarily have to be like overt. It's like, smoke this.
Yeah, well, I can see
Right.
it now.
It's,
Yeah, like
yes,
as adults, I think we can recognize it. But like as a youth, I
Yeah.
didn't see that at all.
Yeah.
Like I didn't get that like, oh, come with us, and like this is going to be a good time. Like there was a little bit of pressure with that as a child, and I didn't get that. I see it now, and I can hear it, like listening to his story and being like, yeah, I think we've been there.
But the bigger pressure is this subconscious pressure of like just the imagery that you're getting
Yeah.
and wanting to emulate or be like these people that, yeah. But Chris, your experience was completely different, wasn't it? Or was it?
Wow. In Singapore, I mean, there was no.
Okay, so your experience growing up was different in the sense that that wasn't even an option. Like it wasn't even
I mean, you can go out and like drink and stuff, like, but I was like,
just wasn't done. Yeah.
I didn't do it. I mean, I was playing sports. It was like too much effort to literally have to go super far away to like go get a drink when I could just be doing this stuff anyway. And then it's nighttime and I go to sleep. That's basically what I did.
But not commonly done amongst your
My
peers.
No, not in Singapore, not at all.
No.
I mean, again, it was in Singapore. My close friends was like my brother and maybe 1 or 2 other people. So we didn't really. And we'd go take the bus down and go to the skate shop, and everyone, they're like Malay and Singaporeans and all sorts of guys all over coming in, skating around, and their countries have kind of similar rules and stuff, but they all live in Singapore, so it's not like we're all going out and just getting wasted,
Right.
So it was totally different.
Culture completely different.
Yeah, even skate culture. I mean, we were like 5 years behind because there's no internet. So when Mouse came out, we were still getting like, H Street video. We were like delayed.
Even Canada was always a year or 2 behind in the
was.
trends.
Yeah.
Like looking back, I can see that. When I look at videos, I can be like, oh, this is what we were wearing in 93, but this is what all the skate videos that came out in 93 people were actually wearing, which would have, you could see there's a lag.
Yeah, there's a little delay. So in Singapore, you can imagine across the planet. And then when I got to Canada, back to Canada, I was in like 97, end of 97, maybe 98.
So how old are you at that point?
I was probably I was coming out of 18. I was able to navigate the circle, whatever, the scene or whatever.
I think the really vulnerable age is that 11 to 14,
Yeah.
even to 15,
Yeah.
but like especially the to 14.
Yeah, for sure.
Highly influenced, yeah.
I've seen like my kids, I've got 3, like I've definitely seen that they are the most volatile at that age.
Yeah. Jess, your experience, because you were the good student, weren't you?
Yeah, that's the problem. So I'm listening to these stories. And I think it's interesting, too, as a woman.
Yeah.
Because I'm listening to all you guys talk about, like, school, and maybe not you as much, Chris, because you were, like, on the straight and narrow. But, like, I had the exact same experience. I would be talking the whole time. I would be asleep in most of my classes, but I'm a woman. I'm a girl. I wasn't as picked on as much. I got really decent grades, but I could not pay attention for the life of me, and I had to do what you did, which was go home and teach myself. And like, even when I think of nursing school, I stopped going to nursing classes as long as there was no participation grades. And even when there was, I was like, no, forget it. I don't care. I got to learn this by myself. But I dabbled in substances at like 13 years old. And it's because I felt like I am trying to live up to this standard that is asked of me, and I don't feel like I fit that realm. And so I would find my people, and that's when I was like, oh, this feels good. And it was doing the wrong kinds of things. Now I see that, but at that point it was like, I'm so connected. This is great. So,
and something you said, like, this feels good, which goes back to what you said, was that it was like a relief from all the negativity. Can you talk about that?
That's kind of hard to unpack, that one. Yeah, I honestly don't know how to get into that. I mean, there's like the obvious thing that a lot of drugs just have states of euphoria associated with them. You know, so there's that, right? That I'd say that was one of the big pulls for me. Like I said, I was just a pleasure seeker, right? Like if something felt good, I was going to chase after it. And I wasn't afraid to take risks to do that. So, because the thing about doing drugs is you do have that come down after. It's really bad. So it's not all like, but that just doesn't, you don't think about that, you know, or if you do, you think, whatever, it'll be worth it. I'll struggle through it.
So, incidentally, I'm treating a 13-year-old. He became my patient yesterday. 13 years old, just kid next door. He lives in West Side. He lives on UBC campus, actually. He is using Xanax, so benzodiazepines, and hydromorphone, safe supply hydromorphone that he's buying off the internet, right?
Oh.
At 13 years old.
It's
But
so much worse than it used to be, and it was already bad.
it is. And when I got into it with him, it's anxiety is a major driving factor. He's like crazy anxious. You know, it feels uncomfortable in his own skin. And the relief that he gets when he takes the benzos and the opioids, in many respects, outweighed the consequences until things got really bad for him.
I just remember that feeling that it didn't matter, right? You got this feeling that, oh, okay, all this stress that I feel is being put on me, all these negative feelings, it's like, they don't matter. They're
Right.
gone. It's just gone. I think numb is actually a better way to describe it. Pleasure is not necessarily the right way, because the euphoria part from drugs is actually pretty short-lived.
Yeah.
And your best case scenario is generally just being numb.
And I find that people that end up struggling the most are the ones who maybe there's like an underlying mental health or underlying significant negativity in their life that is resolved by substance use in the moment. So it's not necessarily even the pleasure that's driving them, it's relief of negative feelings that's driving their use.
Yeah, I don't feel like I've ever identified with what people describe suffering with anxiety, like suffering from anxiety feels like. My wife would argue otherwise, but like I don't feel like I've had crippling anxiety very many times in my life.
And that was just an example, but like,
Yeah. No, stress more than anything, just general stress and discomfort. And I would say discomfort with myself more than anything, you know, just like probably feeling like a failure of some kind.
And I feel like that's probably something that many 12-year-olds can relate to, because it's like there's so much pressure on kids these days to live up to a certain standard, to do certain things, and I mean, it's hard to navigate for a little 12-year-old. But then I think there's like a lot of social pressures on kids now as well, with like social media and living up to this false standard.
That's not getting any easier,
right? So
and it's not getting easier with like in any age range
that's
either.
Right.
I think the only thing that changes is the individual's ability to differentiate what is an expectation they are placing on themselves based on their media consumption versus what are the real expectations on themselves from their family and friends.
Yeah, even adults. I mean, like I hear my adult friends who are like, okay, I'm off of.
I'm being called out without being called out. I've quit social media more than once, and it's exactly that. It's like what I'm like doom scrolling, or it's like 3 hours later, I'm like, what is happening? And also, what a curated lifestyle we've created that's so unrealistic. And that's the challenge.
Yeah, I've quit it
before
too.
Yeah, it's hard.
I'm on Instagram again, but I don't post. Like sometimes I'll catch myself posting like a few days in a row, and then I'm like, and then I'm checking messages and comments and I'm like, what happened? What happened?
Right.
I haven't posted right now for maybe like on any Instagram for at least a month, maybe. I think I'm close to a month, and that feels good. I still will check my DMs probably every morning and every evening, but it doesn't take up much time. And when I'm not posting, the activity is very small.
It's funny. It's like an addiction, because we're talking about like it's almost been a month, right?
No, it's not like an addiction. It 100% is.
Yeah.
Having gone through addiction, I recognize it completely. And I think it's also going to be one of the major addictions that we see fallout from and people struggling with for decades.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I don't think it's talked about in actual terms yet. I don't think we're willing to confront that one yet. But I'm so vigilant with my kids about that stuff.
Okay, yeah. I should be more. You know,
it's in terms of just like chemically, it's like have a little bit of cocaine, but don't do too much.
It's going to.
It does the same thing. It gets all the same neurotransmitters fired up. Yes, it might not like catastrophically pull as much, but you still have all these little highs, these little peaks, and then you still have a big come down, and then you're still left sitting there like, what have I been doing with my life?
Yeah.
And then you've got all the downfalls from just comparing yourself to other people's representation of themselves, right? Their posturing, which is not at all related to reality. So I actually think that is going to be one of the things we're going to be dealing with the fallout from that for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's very much analogous to nicotine companies. You know, like cigarettes were designed from every aspect to be addicting: the packaging,
right,
the taste, the smell, the chemicals, etc., etc. But it was also, they're not bad for you. There's no evidence that it's bad for you. In fact, it could be good for you.
Most doctors smoke Camel.
Well, yeah.
What's your brand?
Right. And like there was a time where like doctors would round in the hospital smoking, right? And it wasn't until like 20, 30, 40 years later when we recognized that all, you know, cancer, etc., heart disease, etc., all the consequences of nicotine use.
Warning, social media may cause severe anxiety and suicide.
Right.
Literally.
Yeah.
Where do you put that sticker?
Right
Every
over top
time-
of the Instagram sticker.
Like right every time you download it.
Right under.
These algorithms, like the nicotine companies, they're designed to get you hooked and for you to spend as much time as possible
You
on
have the
social media.
brightest and best minds on the planet all engineering something against you. How do you stand a chance?
That's right. Okay, so I'm going to do what you guys told me not to do.
Don't
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it.
Don't
I'm
paint
going
the picture. We
I'm
know
going
what
to paint
the
a
picture
picture.
is.
I'm known as the Bob Ross of drywall.
Okay.
Well, that's awesome. That was a plug. I love
I'm
it.
pretty sure you're not. Okay.
And like and subscribe.
What do you mean?
Are you? Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I see that comment. I've seen that
Seriously?
comment hundreds
No
of
way.
times. Hundreds of times.
Yeah. All right. 10-year-old. I'm gonna do. I can't help myself.
Why can't you just ask the question? Chris, do you have any questions you'd like to ask at this point, so we don't have to have a picture painted?
Oh, not so much. I mean, I just was thinking about like, just how, like you said, it's like perspective. Just the concept of like just changing how your mind thinks. Can you see any sort of like should there be things put in like to, I don't know, psychiatry or something to teach kids how to potentially manage their perspective properly or something?
I don't know, but what you're making me think of something else that comes from 12-step recovery programs. So the whole purpose, like what they were, there was an addictions doctor who observed that he had zero ability to cure any severe alcoholic. And the only time that he ever witnessed a change in this is before Alcoholics Anonymous, because before that there was very few avenues for people to get sober. So before Alcoholics Anonymous, this doctor noted that basically for the severe alcoholic, they're incurable and he can do nothing for them. And he typically did not like to take those patients on because he knew that there was basically a 0% success rate. He said, but on rare occasions, he would see somebody have a spiritual transformation where all of a sudden, like something flipped. Their entire perspective changed. And they now saw themselves differently. They saw the world differently. They saw their place in the world differently. And they never went back to it. And it was so rare. But what the 12 steps was designed to do, and I think it's important to realize that the design for that was not necessarily by people. So if I'm going to speak on spiritual terms to explain it, but it originally came from a group of Christians in the U.S. who were having some success helping people overcome alcoholism. But there was a few pitfalls, right? The fact that it was a religious group was not a selling point for a lot of people, because when you live your life in a way that is obviously against the wishes of your creator, whether you choose to believe in one or not, but like if we're talking about God, we can be pretty sure that God probably doesn't want me to destroy myself with drugs and alcohol. So I'm likely going to bristle with antagonism at the mere mention of spiritual concepts if I'm hell-bent on destroying my life. So it didn't have a lot of success for some of those reasons, which is why 12-step programs they developed a spiritual but non-religious approach. So nobody was having anybody's dogma rammed down their throat, but the intended design, which I went away from a little bit, the idea or belief among people who follow a 12-step program is that the original conception was somewhat divinely inspired through a group of people. It wasn't just one person like sitting down and writing something. It was like a group of people coming up through a long trial and error as well. Like the AA stories are actually really interesting if you get into the history of how the 12 steps was developed in the early days of it, and how all of the things that have become permanently implemented in that program were as a result of their failures and successes. So anyways, getting back to it, the 12 steps is designed, some believe divinely, to help people gain to help people have a spiritual awakening of what I would call an educational variety. So some people have like the thunder and lightning, like something changes, their life is different forever, and it lasts. And some people have a spiritual awakening of the slow educational variety, where little bit by little bit, they eventually are able to change their life by doing things that help open their minds and their hearts to the possibility that there is something greater than themselves, something that can run their lives better than they have been running it into the ground, I think you get the general idea, right? That the 12 steps are designed to take people from being so focused inward to being focused outward.
That's right.
And I think that is one of the solutions to addiction, because addiction is, I would say, self-centeredness. Like, it's pain and self-centeredness all turned inward. And it can be, it's suffocating, right? It's so hard to find your way out of that, especially as the problems that begin to occur from that lifestyle pile up.
Let's talk about those problems piling up, because you very quickly went, and I know much of your story, so, but you very quickly went from experimenting with alcohol and cannabis to the hallucinogens, then methamphetamine.
Well, it wasn't very quickly.
Okay.
I would say I experimented with cannabis. That sounds so professional. And, and smoking weed probably sounds so, like, my dad would be like, "Are you smoking dope?"
That's right.
That's probably exactly what I sound like when I say smoking weed.
Yeah.
What do the kids call it these days? They got all sorts of names for it.
Pot.
They call it pot?
It's still pot.
Pot.
Yeah.
It's still pot, guys.
All right.
You're
Okay.
okay.
All right.
And weed.
Okay.
It's a weed store.
It's okay. I don't need to be cool anymore.
But you still felt it, right?
Yeah.
It's still there.
Still there.
Doesn't
Still
go
there.
away.
Okay. I'm going to use cannabis just to be annoying.
Okay.
What were we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, the progression to meth.
Yeah, right. Okay. So I experimented with smoking pot and then just drinking alcohol from about 12 to 15. Then we moved from Vancouver. I also had a bunch of injuries. I broke my arms like 6 times in a year.
Skating?
Yeah. I got like a gnarly compound fracture and stuff. And that like changed skating for me. I never stopped wanting to do it, but I had like definitely some trauma there. You know, I didn't want to jump down big stairs and handrails and stuff. I was like, no more. No.
It was a handrail, right?
No.
No, what was it?
No, but it was just a grind on a tall ledge, but I had broken my wrist previously and had a small fracture here. So they were like primed and ready to be broken really badly. Yeah. I spent a week in the hospital.
Jeez.
The morphine there was good.
Ah,
Yeah, I like
okay.
that.
Here we go.
14. Okay. But yeah, just weed and alcohol for like 2 years. And then we moved to Victoria shortly after breaking my arms. And I just went from having a whole lot of friends and an awesome skateboard community. When I say awesome, I meant it was mine. Didn't have to be necessarily healthy, but it was, you know, what I knew and loved. So from Vancouver, and then we moved to Victoria, which sucked. Victoria had a lame skate scene at the time. It was a bunch of hillbillies.
Yeah.
Called out.
And I was living in Sydney, so imagine what my scene.
No, it was just different. Like, you know, like it was, Vancouver had like a cool skate scene, and then Victoria had one that was like a bunch of guys doing, you know, grabs off of launch ramps still. Like it was just not the same skate scene. Right? And the spots sucked. And I was just like emotionally recovering from these injuries still. You know, like I can look back and see that, but I wouldn't have said that at the time. But anyways, and school still sucked. I still hated school. And it just progressed from there. I started smoking a lot of weed when I moved to Victoria. It went from being something that I did with people to something that I was actively buying and engaged in the actual lifestyle and culture of it.
So that's interesting because you're losing.
I went from passive to active in my addiction.
And at the same time, your level of distress had gone way up.
Yeah.
Because you lost your community, right? Your friends, your connections, but also you were struggling with the activity that you love most, skateboarding, because of the injuries and the trauma associated with that.
You never looked at that way.
Am I making like? I don't
No, you're not making assumptions. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that pain, was it relieved by increasing by the cannabis, by smoking more?
Yeah.
pot? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then meth, where did that come in?
Let's slow down a little because we're skipping steps here.
Okay. I think for us, the process is not specifics, but the process is interesting. Like, again, that mindset of, I'm going to do it again, the 10-year-old, the 14-year-old skater now in Victoria, and what's shifted. And
also, when you're talking about meth, the way we see it now is very different than in the 90s. Nobody even knew what it was.
That's right.
It was just some girls that had some stuff called jib.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's like, what is that? We don't know.
So true.
Yeah.
Is it?
So true, because I have friends that are in this age category, and meth use was normal. It exploded in the 90s. It had been around for ages.
Speed,
yeah. But it exploded in the 90s. With rave culture and stuff. And it was just some girls, one girl I had a crush on, and they were going to raves, and
Damn it, those women. But
I was already like willing to try whatever. I think I had tried worse stuff before that, right? But like, definitely, so I was already pretty deep into substance use in general. That just happened to be the one that particularly ticked the boxes for me.
Well,
that's all. I don't know. It was cheap, lasted a long time, and, was really fun at first. That's it. It made me skate really good for one day, but then the second day you can't skate at all because you're like, your equilibrium's all off. But so, I could even justify it that way. I'm like, man, that's the best I've ever skated. Once. And then you have an addiction. I mean, in my experience, I can't, I don't want to say this is what happens when you know.
No, it's all about your experience.
Did you have do you have aspirations on being like pro or anything like this at that time?
I mean, for sure, growing up, it's what I wanted probably more than anything. But the severe injuries and also the direction that skateboarding was going made it look not very likely, because skating was all about like how big of a set of stairs can people jump down, how big of a rail, all this sort of, there nowadays I think it's actually better because there's avenues people can take. Not everyone has to just do big stairs and rails. Right. You came up in that time, and I know you did your part.
I switched though. I was doing big rails,
You've
rails
talked about that,
and stuff, but it was also the company that I was keeping, allowed me to keep that company of Broadney and Day One, that allowed me to like kind of tone down my skill sets and still be okay with what I was doing, Well, I remember having this conversation with you a couple of years ago. You were like talking about, when you were relieved to just like, I don't have to do that anymore. Yeah. I'm still relieved because
it's such a risk.
Yeah.
It's such a risk.
Yeah, it is.
And I say I'm a risk taker, but like, to a limit,
Well, I want to skate the next day. That's what I don't.
Exactly.
And it hurts.
Yeah, or at best, or a catastrophic injury that changes your skateboarding forever.
Yeah.
Or your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they can be worse. Yeah. Anyways, we don't talk about that.
So, was there a point? I mean, going off of Chris's point, was there a point where like you're now mourning that the loss of your life goal, like?
Probably, but not in a conscious way. I think what I did, I realized that it wasn't going to be a possibility. Still would have loved to have had it happen, but I chose to not pursue it. I consciously didn't pursue it. And I think if you want to just get really simplistic about that, it's because it's easier not to try than to fail. That's one possibility. But I also think that if I really gauge like my ability levels with what was happening, even at that time, there was a disparity. Like it was too big. I think had I been lucky enough or determined enough to pursue that, I would have had low-level sponsors and mediocre success at best. So I don't think that not pursuing that was actually a bad decision, regardless of the motive. I think it's also kept my connection to it. It's been nice to not have, I'm not trying to say that anybody that has a financial incentive to skateboard, I don't want to say that it necessarily changes it for them, because everybody's different. But I'm grateful that I didn't have to put that pressure on my skateboarding. It's always just been because I wanted to. So.
And how did?
Because you know what it's like to have that pressure, right?
I know. Yeah, I know. And so how did, like, when you started seeing like Ted do his thing, did that have any sort of?
I don't think I was ever bitterly jealous. I think I was happy for him.
Yeah.
I was like, it'd be nice, but no, I think I was pretty determined to not follow it. But I also think that his experience with that changed his skateboarding for him.
Okay, back to your story, because
I know we've been skipping steps.
no, it's good. It's fine, because this is all super interesting. But and we're not talking about, we're not going to get into war stories, but because things got really bad for you at a certain point.
I think you seem to really want to know, why did I take the plunge into the hard stuff?
And how did you get out?
Okay, so I really remember my justification, and I'm not trying to blame anybody. There's no blame here, but I know that my mom tried tons of stuff because she said she did. She told me her stories, right? But she never developed an addiction. She has her own problems, but it wasn't necessarily an addiction to hard drugs. And so I always thought, well, and she'd always be, I don't have an addictive personality. I've tried everything and I'm not addicted. So I'm like, yeah, well, I'm going to be the same. I can try this. I'll be fine. Too smart to get addicted. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I based a lot of my decisions off of that advice. I give my kids totally different advice.
Okay.
I tell my kids, you're primed. I tell my kids they are primed for addiction, should they choose to dabble too much. Because, and I don't think it's hereditary. There's this notion that it's hereditary in a lot of 12-step programs. I don't think it's hereditary. I don't think there's like some gene that predisposes you to addiction. I think there is a pattern of thinking that predisposes us to addiction, and that can be learned from your parents. I think there is ways that we either, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I also don't want to overcomplicate it. I think that I've seen enough people who were raised by alcoholics not become alcoholics, and I've seen enough people raised in what appear to be totally functioning families become drug addicts, alcoholics. So I don't think the genetic argument holds water to me.
Okay.
I think it's learned behaviors and coping mechanisms and societal pressures.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Opinion alert.
Right. That's fine. From my perspective, and I do wonder about. There's some evidence around the biological predisposition as well. Like some people's reward pathway may be primed, but nevertheless, I mean, beyond.
But I just don't. I think that's just because drugs are around.
Yeah.
And there's a culture that promotes it. So like I say, I tell my kids, I think they're primed for it. Mm-hmm. Because they were raised by somebody who suffers like this, or who has suffered from that, so they're going to have a bunch of learned behaviors. No, I don't totally buy that. Okay. I'm not a believer in that. I think it's too fatalistic or deterministic. Mm-hmm. I think people have more. I think they have the potential to have more freedom and free will than that.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so things got really, and I know your story to some extent. So things did get really bad for you at a certain point.
Yeah. Yeah, I had burned every bridge I had. I had nowhere to live. And I had been trying to quit for about 2 years and just always going back to it. Like every time was the last time. And I got clean and sober because I ran out of options. It was December. I had nowhere to live. And my options were stay on the streets or go to a treatment center. But when I got to the treatment center, I became willing to try. I thought it was the stupidest idea to send me to a treatment center, especially one that my dad was actually paying for.
How come?
Because I'd tried for 2 years to get clean. It wasn't going to work.
You didn't believe it was going to work.
No. I thought it was absolutely hopeless.
So did you think
Waste of money.
at this point?
But I had no options.
So were you thinking this is going to be my life forever? Like this is as good as it's going to get?
As good as it's going to get?
Or as bad as it's going to get? Like, I don't know.
I wandered around with in a constant state of disbelief that my life wound up the way it did.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Right.
I couldn't put the pieces together as to why.
How did that 10-year-old that's like terrified of drugs end up homeless?
It wasn't even that. I mean, I would say I was, like, I feel like I was raised in a decent family. I mean, I definitely had that feeling at the time. And, like, it just didn't make sense. I was like, why am I, like, out here on the streets living like this? I was just like, I don't understand why. Like it all makes sense to me now.
So what was it about the treatment center that changed things for you?
Well, not to harp on about it, but I think the 12 steps actually is really effective when you get a willing individual who's ready to be honest. I think it is really effective. I've known hundreds and, personally known hundreds and witnessed many, many, many thousands of people who have changed their lives because of that. So there's power there. There's something there. And I know it doesn't work for everybody. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But I do think it's incredibly effective for people when they have reached that point of willingness. And that's it. I'd reached a point of willingness. I think my absolute lack of faith in myself made me willing to try anything. And I guess that just means I still had a spark. Hope isn't even the right word, but I still had some will to live. Like I don't think I didn't consider suicide, I don't think. But I absolutely was, I've heard it said, like I was on the suicide by installments plan. Like I was hoping that I would not wake up from my next blackout. Like that I'd get hit by a car or like fall off a building or.
Non-existing was a relief for you.
Yeah. Oblivion was the
Right.
desired outcome.
Right.
In the end. And I actually wanted to not be doing all the other stuff. I think if I was able to let go of the hard drugs and keep drinking, I may have had another 5 or 10 years of hell to go through. Because that was what sped up the process to the point that my life was, bad enough that I was willing to try something. But because alcohol is a more socially acceptable vice, like people get forgiven for stupid things they do in a blackout. But you don't get forgiven if you steal a bunch of things for people because you're high on stimulants. You know what I mean? Like, not the same. It's not the same.
Yeah.
And so I think I would have stayed loaded for a long time if I could just drink. But I still, at that point, qualified for sobriety. Like, life was still bad enough just for my drinking. But because it's socially acceptable, I would have spiraled for longer. And it could have led to something much worse. So I would say the depths of my addiction is actually one of my greatest blessings as well.
Interesting.
That's crazy, man.
I know, I think you left us speechless.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
be
no,
honest.
that's deep.
Yeah, man.
I'm just going to need a minute.
You came out of it. And then what happened? You came out of the treatment center.
Well, I just continued with 12-step programs.
Okay.
Yeah, I did everything they said to do. I watched people who were constantly deciding not to follow the advice of the people around them in the recovery center, and I saw people getting loaded all the time. And like I said, I was convinced that I was going to be one of them, so I was willing to literally do anything at that point. Like stand on your head in a corner. I mean, it doesn't make sense. But I will if I have to.
You know, it's this dichotomy of addiction is really interesting for me because on one hand, you're painting a picture. They hate it when I use that term. But you're painting this picture of like terrible existence. You're essentially homeless. You've lost all your friends. And people who may not have experienced addiction would be like, well, wow, why didn't you just stop? You should have just stopped. But there was like this drive to continue using. Can you describe what that drive is?
It's twofold.
Yeah.
It's an obsession. So an obsession and a compulsion. So immediately after a bender, you're like, that was horrible. I'm never going to do this again. Mm-hmm. Should you be fortunate enough to not be physically addicted to a substance, because that's different. And I was not into opiates, dabbled a little at the end, but I was terrified of those because I always was like, whatever, you know, like I'll go on like a 4-day bender, but I'm not physically addicted. I can stop. I didn't think I had control, but I knew, you know, that like I didn't, once I ran out of money and resources, the bender ended, right? Mm-hmm. And opiates don't allow you that luxury.
That's right.
Yeah. They force you to grind it out. Refresh me a little bit on what you just asked.
Right, that dichotomy where like life is...
Oh, the obsession and compulsion.
That's
okay,
right.
Okay. It's actually fairly simple. The reasons for why you might start to obsess could be different from person to person. And it actually could be anything, because when you're actually looking for an excuse to go drink, it can be anything. Good things, bad things, nothing, everything. But what happens is inevitably, sooner or later, you are struck with, like you think about it, you are struck with the desire to consume your preferred substance. And it's often accompanied by euphoric recall. So euphoric recall is where it's exactly what it sounds like. You're like, oh, remember that time I was like sitting in the sun having that nice beer? That was so great. Remember that time? Do you remember all the, what? No. Like you don't, there's not even a voice that goes, do you remember all those other times? It's like you're actually not capable of remembering. There's a line in some of the literature. You are incapable of remembering the pain and suffering of even a week or a month ago. Right? This hot element on the stove, that burnt the shit out of me last week. I don't know if it's hot today. I don't think it's hot. It's red, but I don't. Right? Like that obsession gets in, and as soon as the obsession gets in, it's only a matter of time before the compulsion comes. And the compulsion is about muting the obsession. It's about making that constant desire stop. And the great irony is that it's what then fuels the desire. It's gas on the fire.
And then
your desire to continue using.
And then the shame and guilt of...
the shame and guilt comes... I mean, I'm sure you probably feel it a lot. I don't remember feeling it in the moment too much. And if you do, you bury it real quick.
It's after the fact.
Yeah, after. After is when you get the most shame. After is definitely when there is the most shame. And I think that's the part, that's when people are most vulnerable to relapse or suicide. Is probably in those states. Because you failed again, right? And you failed at the one thing that everyone wants you to stop doing or succeed at. And then coupled with just the most intense either depression, anxiety, fear, all of those things that you've ever felt, and shame, like all of those things combined all at the same time. So yeah, it's, people are very vulnerable in that state.
Right.
I can definitely say that some of the most pain, both physically and emotionally, that I've ever felt is definitely like withdrawing or coming down. Yeah, it's 10 out of 10. Do not recommend.
Right. And I think one thing, sorry guys, I'm doing more talking. They're used to it by now. One thing we didn't touch on is the experience of the friend who isn't using but sees their friend using. Do you know what I mean? Like what that might be. And like for instance, Chris, like you were one of the people who didn't use. But I suspect in your skating career, you probably saw friends.
I mean, I kind of steer away from most of the situations that involve the heavier stuff. I mean, the weed and stuff is just everywhere. Which
everybody's doing it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But
I had to come to terms with that pretty early when I got sober, was that it was just everywhere.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's where I'm at. I mean, I didn't put myself into. I didn't go into the woods. I didn't like do any of that stuff. You know what I mean? Like I was like, what the hell am I going to do in there? I'm going to just want to do kickflips and shit.
But did you have friends that went down and you saw them struggle with addiction, or was it in your circle?
Well, like my life was a little like I early the elementary school style. I was in London, Ontario. As we weren't doing, I was in grade like 4 and 5. Like we didn't do anything then. And then when I moved to Singapore in like 91, I basically left all those friends. I didn't even talk to them anymore. I still don't, and then so I moved to Singapore. I did the whole Singapore thing for 8-9 years. I left that and I moved to Vancouver in 98, and I basically left all them behind. So I didn't really have the, like, my old friends doing these things, you know what I mean? It was just people that I was in the moment with, and then usually I'm already like, I don't need to go to the bar tonight, or I don't drink anyway. I mean, a lot of it is alcohol and weed. I mean, not even weed. Alcohol is like the major one. That's where a lot of the guys do, because it's, you can just go buy it like in the store and stuff. And every contest is like,
I think it's the number one reason for contest runs.
Oh, probably. Oh, yeah.
I didn't think of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, but I do mean that, again, it's more socially acceptable, and I think it's very prevalent.
Yeah.
Alcohol. Mm-hmm. The deeper divers there's definitely a huge cocaine culture, and at some levels in skating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when your runs on the Sunday and you're partying since Thursday night, and I'm sure those guys probably could have performed
I
better.
remember seeing guys like puke during their contest runs and stuff.
Yeah, well, I still do. Yeah,
it's. I want to get into that. I do want to ask Jessica though, because again, different perspective.
Skateboarding?
No, but like your experience of seeing friends go through addiction. Like, what do you do?
Oh, that's hard. I'm a crier, and I don't want to cry on a podcast. I've watched lots of my friends go through it, and have many that have passed. So it actually totally got me on my straight and narrow to not be dabbling in any of that stuff that I used to be. I mean, I still do the socially acceptable things that are allowed in society, but I don't touch any of the other stuff. But it was jolting. It was like a really big kick in like the face to just be like, wow, this is a person that I know and love and care about, and there's nothing we can do to help them. And we talk about it in our work all the time of like, you need this really great support group, and if you have one person that loves and cares about this person, then you can like pull them from the throes of addiction. And I mean, Ben, you're talking about your dad paying for treatment and stuff, and that's wicked awesome, but yeah, there's lots of times where we can do nothing to help those people.
And there's no guarantees the treatment center can either.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It was, for me, right time, right place.
Yeah.
Like lots of my friends were not ready to make that commitment. And some people got sober and have been sober for several years and then relapsed and told no one because of that shame. And it's that I think was the hardest part for our friend circle, to be like, well, what about us made it so that you couldn't come and share that? And that's kind of the burden that I think all of us carry. And no matter how much we talk about this and know like, oh, it's got to come from inside, I think that's been like the heaviest piece of.
Because you end up feeling the guilt. Like, why wasn't I there for them?
Oh, yeah. Like they overdosed in their apartment and they were dead for days and no one knew. And no one knew they had relapsed. So, yeah, it leaves behind so many victims, right? So, yeah, that's my experience. Heavy.
Yeah.
Jesus, let's talk about skateboarding. For a minute. Jesus.
Well, I mean, it's hard to talk about it, and like I don't want
That is the truth of it, though.
and on a downer, but
Yeah.
this is the reality of it in our work, right? Like I was telling Jessica this. I have, especially when I used to work a lot with youth, and I work less with youth now. But you would just see them fall through your fingers, you know, like you see the trajectory and there's only so much you can do. And like you end up losing these patients that are like super young. And you feel helpless to a certain extent. It's really hard. Yeah. But I can't imagine like as a friend having that experience as well. And it's hard to talk about it. I don't want to end on a downer, but like, this is the reality. We're in like
Well, I was the selfish addict, so I didn't know any better. I was the friend.
well, I mean, and there's like, I don't know, self-judgment or self-blame when you call it a selfish addict, but like you were going through some
No, that's
shit,
just
right?
that's the truth.
Okay.
I mean, like I said, at the root of it was self-centeredness. I was unable to really comprehend what my actions, the effects of my actions. I couldn't see it. Couldn't understand why it mattered to anyone else, what I did.
I don't necessarily think that's selfish.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying and I totally get that, but I look at it and I think of like some of the people that I know and it's like just no self-love. Like that's what it was. It was.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the people that I try to help, you know, in our work that we try to help, I think of, and I understand, I hear their story and we talk about it and I think to myself, geez, like if I had gone through what they had gone through, I'd likely be right there with them. Do you know what I'm saying? So, and they may be in this spiral of self-blame. I'm selfish. I'm an ass. I can't believe I did this. I hate myself. And then from an outsider's perspective, I like learn about their experience. I'm like, you may feel that way, but I would likely be right there doing what you're doing if I'd gone through what you've gone through. So, and I think it's important for someone in my position to gain that perspective because there's a lot of stigma associated with substance use, and people, when you see somebody struggling with addiction, the easy default is, well, they made bad decisions. What an ass. How selfish could they be? Right? Which may be oversimplifying it.
I think I should qualify my statement of selfish addict,
Right.
because addiction brings selfishness to the center of a person. It brings it out to the front. Otherwise, if it didn't, you wouldn't see the actions. The actions of people who are addicted to substances wouldn't be so selfish.
I
It
get that.
brings
It's the behavior.
out the worst.
It's the behavior.
Yeah. I didn't mean to imply that every addict is a selfish human being.
And what I try to tell people, I'm doing a lot of talking again.
Fine.
But, you know, children who have parents who struggle with addiction or loved ones, I try to, you know, go through this exercise of like, okay, let's separate the person from the addict. Right. And you know, addict, I don't like to use that term because it can be pejorative, but let's separate your father from the addicted father. Right. What are some qualities and attributes and memories you have with your father? Because that person is still there. Now, what are some experiences you've had with the addicted father? So then trying to change the addicted behavior with the individual. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like when you say that a selfish addict, I'm thinking you're referring to the behaviors that are brought out by the addiction.
Yeah.
Right? The person who's stealing whatever they can to use, I mean, that's a selfish act, right? Because you don't care about the people you're hurting around you, but that behavior is driven by this profound drive to use. That's the addiction.
Yeah. That's better put.
Well, I don't know if it is, but
No,
because I know you do. Like, you are one of the most selfless people I've ever met.
I don't feel that way.
You are.
Thanks.
It's part of it.
Yeah. 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 You still skate?
Me?
Yeah, every day?
Well, I can't every day.
Yeah.
I mean, torn my meniscus twice.
That's
Knee
right.
gets pretty sore if I skate every single day.
That's right.
Sometimes I skate about 3 or 4 days a week, and sometimes I will only skate once a week or so. Right now, I'm on the skating bit less. It's nice though, because my Achilles doesn't hurt, and my knee doesn't hurt, and you know, it saves it. I'd be skating a bit more if I could, but that's okay, because I've skated lots in my life, and I will get to skate again.
Right.
Ooh, I like the positive reframe you just did there, because that could be like a negative experience. And I feel like some of you guys might have that as skaters, with it changing. And you guys talk about that of like, even Rodney was talking about this, about like, oh, I'm never gonna be able to skate again. And like losing that, and the huge piece in your life that it sounds like skating is, and making sure that that doesn't suck you down under, like never being able to get on a board again and be able to do that again can be like, Chris, you're just staring off into a distance.
Well,
like, what if
I know someone who's doing that right now.
Yeah.
That's why I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think I have enough things and people in my life that I'd be able to shift focus if you know, if and when that happens, because it will. The day that, you know, it will come when you can't skate anymore.
Yeah.
I just try to be grateful that I can. I had an experience not too long ago where, you know, I was filming for some kind of pointless Instagram post, and I'm trying to do some trick. And the whole time in my head, I had like some negative caption. It was too long ago. And I'm like trying to think about, like, oh, ledges are all taller than they used to be, you know, like this. But in essence, it's actually complaining. It's actually a negative thought, you know, even though we can relate to it. I was having this thought, and I keep missing it. And I must have been like 30 tries deep. And I'm like circling back, so I hit the mic, circling back around to try it again. And then I all of a sudden had this thought. I was like, wow, how lucky am I that I even can do this and have the ability that I do to even try this right now at 42 years old.
Right.
And I think I landed it the next try, and then landed 2 more within 3 tries. It was just like, boink. I went from like this, grief sounds extreme, but it was like micro grieving my skateboard abilities, and then all of a sudden being grateful that I could, and there it was.
Skateboarding is interesting in that way, because I mean, I don't get to skate very much, just with everything going on.
It's I'm going back to you doing the line, because that was literally like nothing physical had changed.
Oh, I love, skater talk, doing rails, doing lines.
I was like, what's a line?
A line is multiple tricks in a row.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
a rail is just like a handrail or a flat bar.
Interesting terminology.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were doing, nothing had changed besides your perspective on the situation.
Yeah, in fact, I was more tired.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was getting at before, is that how do we,
The mindset.
can you put, because it was like one try that you switched your mindset.
Yeah, but you know, you could also try and recreate that, and it wouldn't work too. It was in the moment.
So it's just.
But I do think being able to just be in kind of awe and grateful that there you are able to do it. It's focusing on what you can do as opposed to what you used to have.
Yeah.
Do you ever go through this exercise, this question to you too, where you wish you had the same passion for something that you can't grow out of? Like, sometimes I think like, man, like what if I had the same desire, passion for chess, right? Because you can't grow out of the physical ability to do chess. You know what I'm saying? But like skating, you're gonna
die eventually. You can't play chess forever.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Nothing's permanent.
It's true.
There
That's
you go.
true. That's true. I don't know. Okay, fair. I do that. I go through that mental exercise. It's like, I wish it was like maybe golf or chess or something that like the time will come where like we may not be able to ollie anymore. I don't know.
So I think it'll happen pretty naturally. I think the time will come where I can't skateboard anymore. I think if I couldn't do that right now, I would probably sit around depressed for about a month, and then I would just start doing tons of construction work because I actually love building stuff.
Do you? Yeah.
Yeah, love building stuff. There's stresses involved with that, but it's nice to have something like that to offer and keep myself busy. And I may, I think I would just shift gears. And then when that's gone, who knows? I might have grandkids by that point. Like I'm not that far from, ideally, I'm hoping I'm at least 10 years away from it.
What about you, Chris? Because like skateboarding was, you were a professional skateboarder. This is your livelihood.
Yeah.
It still is. Do you ever have that go down that road?
I mean, I sometimes think that but all the stuff I think I could be good, I could just pick it up and like within a couple, like with practice and stuff like that. And like I've already had something that's enormous.
Yeah, right.
I'm okay playing guitar at a mediocre level for the rest of my life, or playing terrible chess games, or having a mean hook on the golf court. I mean, it doesn't really bother me that much. I mean, I to be able to have something already that you could have focused on that intensely and have it. A lot of people don't have that in the first place. So.
That's a nice place to be. You sound super grateful for what skateboarding has given to you.
Yeah, skating's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it sound weird, Jess?
No.
Listen to us talk.
Are you kidding me? Like, I vibe on this. It's like nice to hear people talk about their passions. You guys have such a heart for it. It's so obvious. That's why I asked the question of like when you eventually have to give it up, because it will come. It comes for all of us, right? What does that look like? And the reason I ask that is because I can imagine that there are people who their whole life is skating, and there's going to be a time where they have to give it up, whether it's because, career-wise, it's like I can no longer do this in the way that I am right now, or because something happens with like an injury or an event and they can't do that. And how do you not lose yourself in those moments? And I think you guys are all touching on some pieces, because this is a community, this is like a culture, this is like a club for you. And no one understands skaters except skaters. You guys all allude to stuff like that. So I just like to hear gratitude and positivity and like honoring skate culture. It's nice so that other people can recognize that.
I think it could depend on how hinged your personality or your view of yourself is on skateboarding. How, like, are you an individual and a person outside of skateboard? Like, not do others perceive you, but do you perceive yourself as anything without skateboarding?
What about those people who don't?
Question. Well, then, just find something. Like, find yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a long time. It was one-track lifestyle for 30 years. As soon as I found it, I mean, I would do school for the first 10. I would be doing school. I would go to UBC and just barely scraping by. And then, when the whole career thing started, that's it. I'm traveling everywhere. I'm only skating. I don't care about, playing any sort of team sports I used to play. I gave all that up. I stopped playing guitar and gave all that up. I was like, I'm 100% committed to skating. That defines who I am.
Right.
But if you can't figure that, if you can't get out of that, that might be an issue later. But because then when you can't do it, it defines who you are. Then you're gonna potentially have some problems with it.
Yeah, but true. And I think it's much more profound than a sport on a board, right? Because you both have deeply impacted people's lives through your skateboarding, right? You have with your channel and you have with your career, right? So, I mean, people call you Skate Dad. And there's depth to that though, right?
Yeah. Daddy Ben.
Daddy man.
You got all sorts of names. What was the other one? Drywall Bob Ross.
Bob Ross of
Bob
Drywall.
Ross, yeah.
That's my alter ego.
But that's huge because I think you've used skateboarding to impact people in such a positive way, and you have too, Chris. And with your brand, Brainchild, and the mental health focus, and maybe this primary prevention stuff, it's still through skateboard culture, but you guys are continuing to positively impact people. So it goes way beyond just having fun on a board, right?
Well, we're getting older. It's all the range of people that skateboarding can touch is like,
It's huge.
yeah, it's everyone now.
Dude, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, it's been nice. It's a lot to ask, for you to share this stuff.
I mean, once in a while,
All right.
Can't do anything good with it if you keep it all inside.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll come back?
Yeah. Maybe we'll,
You can grill him this time.
keep it lighter.
Yeah.
Did I talk less? I don't know.
You did a good job. We're proud.
Oh.
Right, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll discuss after.
Thanks, dude.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thanks for having me.